pressure is something that happens in your head. All pressure comes from some thoughts you think. We get the company from like pretty much zero to like hundreds of millions in value. It didn't feel hard at any single point. If you attach your identity to that company, burnout, because your identity is dying with the extinction of your runway. It's extraordinarily important to have a strong connection to your body. I think if you don't, it's just a question of time until it kills yourself. I think the entrepreneurial stress was related to Steve Jobs' cancer. And I believe life, in essence, only happens in the moment. And that's how I feel when I'm at my peak.
Welcome to Peakspan, a podcast exploring longevity through the mind. We got used to training, tracking, supplementing, and optimizing. Yet the system that governs it all is often left out of the equation, our psychology.
Peakspan, we treat the mind as a biological asset, because mind and body work as one integrated system. The body cannot stay healthy when the mind is not. In each episode, we sit down with neuroscientists, founders, and world-class performers to uncover how our nervous system, emotional depth, and mental capacity determine how long and how well we can live and lead. We're your hosts, Sophie
and Alexandra. Through our own journeys in high-performance environments, we learned that longevity isn't about pushing harder. It's about building a system that holds under pressure. Let's dive in.
The man who already invested in 7 companies that then turned out to be unicorns and that notoriously declines any podcast requests he gets, actually sat down with us for a whole hour. This is extremely exciting because if there was one person in the world who optimized and systemized lived experience to optimize for peak performance, it is Daniel Dippold. He already held his first TED Talk in his early 20s. He also raised over 100 million already in his 20s, while he was top of class in top universities like Cambridge or St. Gallen. He also wrote a productivity book that has been downloaded over 1,000 of times. And today, he's running EWOR, one of the most promising up-and-coming investment companies in the world. What makes today's episode so special is not the insane credentials Dani holds, but the depth we've reached. We talked about the systems that he believes build billion-dollar companies, why he thinks burnout is misunderstood, and what early burnout warning signs he now spots in founders. We also touched on the topic of pressure, how he's been living with insane amounts of pressure ever since his teens, and what specific mental reframe he uses for it not to feel like pressure at all. Dani is a dear friend of mine, and ever since I've known him, I've been really inspired by him. After today's episode, I'm sure you'll understand why. My name is Sophie, and together with my co-host Alexandra, this is Daniel Dippold at Peakspan. Enjoy. Dani, you're building one of the most promising up-and-coming investment companies in the world, EWOR. How did you get to that point?
Good question. Do you want the full story? Do you want the quick one? What helps
Middle.
best? Middle. All right. The middle story is I come from a small German village, and actually never planned to build a company. I've experienced bankruptcies in the family, and always said I never want this, right? And many things transpired, and with 19 I started building my first company, which was a research project, and it basically just was fun. And I realized, hey, I could monetize this, and it ended up working quite well. I exited when I was 21. Then I started multiple companies since, and eventually this culminated in me doing way too many things at the same time. I invested, I built communities, I built tech companies, and I kind of wished, hey, could I have this all in like one organization? And what got me to what I'm doing today is basically the wish to do one thing and one thing only. I believe all great things come from focus. and I want to run this organization as it stands today. Things can, of course, always change, but as things stand today, I want to run this organization for the rest of my life. And it combines all of the things I love, all of the things I'm good at, and that ends in a very weird Berkshire Hathaway-like investment structure, right? That to the outside looks a little bit like Y Combinator, but then at the same time has like the legal structure of like a Berkshire Hathaway and is full on evergreen, and then has the team of a tech company, right? So it's a very weird construct, but I think it's what I'm most uniquely shaped to do.
You just said the word love, and if I know one thing about you, I know you love optimization. And I'm really curious. Maybe this is a chicken egg question here. Did your love for optimization come because of your success, or were you so successful because of your love for optimization?
It's a very difficult question. And of course, success is multi-causal, and it's almost impossible to trace it back, right? I think the general thing with success is you have a very intense teleological fallacy, right? So in retrospect, you can perfectly explain how you get there. There's this analogy that I really not like is you're at one leaf of a tree, right? And there's only one way back to the trunk. So explaining it backwards is always, there's only one way. It's very simple, right? We're storytelling animals. And going from the trunk to any leaf, there's like 80,000 options, right? So I feel success is a little bit like that. And the very honest answer is I cannot answer your question, right? Like perfectly. I can only give you an idea of what I believe is likely. That is probably an idea better than random, but it won't be perfect. My idea of where it comes from is twofold. I definitely believe I was born with, some sort of like obsessive traits. Whatever I've done in life, I've always obsessed about, and that includes optimization. So there's certain things that are probably to some extent genetic or environmental or have been instilled in me very early on. But then, of course, I do also believe that reflection and very consciously saying, hey, I want to optimize my entrepreneurial career at one point led to a lot of great results that kind of happened as a kind of consequence. So I think it is this micro optimization. We actually did a session with like the EWOR founders that we invested in around 2 days ago, where we talked about like what is this system that if you do this, it compounds into a pretty certain $1 billion company, right? And I personally believe this system exists. I believe that this system needs to balance different layers of abstraction. You can't just say, oh, you just execute every day and micro optimize, because sometimes you might have to do a massive pivot in order to react to market shifts. So you need the necessary level of reflection in the system. But I do believe the system exists, and I do believe it is built on optimization. And therefore, optimization in my life plays a very important role. And for the last 12 years or so, I've tried to optimize more and more, of course, until you reach some sort of goal, and then you stop optimizing, because optimizing is never an end point. It is just a means to an end.
You just said for the last 12 years. I know you've been, you've been starting to build since a teenager. You've been under high pressure all your 20s, and at Peakspan we talk about the mental components of longevity. So how did you deal with all that pressure imposed on your nervous system ever since your teens, really?
Yeah. I think pressure is something that happens in your head. I think it's, it's of course not negligible, because our head primarily defines the reality we live in. And in the end, a lot of diseases are traced back to some sort of, psychosomatic effect. So I'm not neglecting how important that component is, but pretty much all pressure comes from is some thoughts you think, right? And the Stoics have a very nice way of framing this, right? That in their framing, nothing is truly bad. Only your opinion about these things is bad. And I genuinely believe in this. And I had moments in my life where I did a lot. For example, I skateboarded, right? I used to be a skateboarder. I got my first sponsorship as a skateboarder, and I certainly worked really hard to get the sponsorship, but it didn't feel like work. It was what I wanted to do. I just wanted to skateboard. And every day I got up in order to like get better. And the pursuit of getting better was like the most beautiful thing, right? It's like playing a game. You play Super Mario and you play an easy level, right? You want to play the harder level. Harder is good, right? It's not like, oh, why do I have to do this hard level? It's so unfair. Now I have all of this pressure. I might fail. You want to play the hard level as long as you see it as a game, right? And when I used to skateboard, there was like zero pressure. In school, in high school specifically, where I didn't care a lot about anything, you have the pressure because it's externally imposed upon you. And I think this is where most of the issues come from. I see a lot of entrepreneurs, they are successful because their parents want them to be, society wants them to be, they are overcompensating. And I think this creates pressure because you're not doing it for yourself. But if you're doing it something for yourself, like skateboarding back in the day, or for me, or playing games, you don't feel that pressure. And you can perform on a level extraordinarily higher than anyone else who does it for these external circumstances, and it doesn't feel like work ever. It's just playing a game. And this is also something I've optimized for, right? Like it's a very weird way of optimization. Typically you think about like optimizing sleep or time or biohacking, stuff that's measurable. I also optimize for flow and for enjoyment. And I know that I'm a certain, like type of character, and I like some things and I don't like others. And one of the things I started trying to understand over my, 12-year now entrepreneurial career is what do I like? What gives me joy? And like right now, like the last 2 years or so, I would say we of course scaled the company from like pretty much zero to like hundreds of millions in value. It didn't feel hard at any single point. Like not at like one point did it feel like I had pressure or that I needed to do things that I didn't want to do. It felt nice. I loved it. I loved every second of it. And I genuinely believe that for most of, like the future of this company, it can stay this way. So pressure is very subjective. I believe that if you find that thing that makes you personally aligned with what you do, you don't experience it. And if you learn to reframe the stories your head tells you, in order to also not experience it, you can have a pretty high performance blast without ever being under pressure.
Makes a lot of sense. And as I understood correctly, you also wrote a book on productivity, right? The Science of Productivity. So that was probably also part of, or I can imagine that was part of your success. Maybe you want to briefly walk us through what you found there, or what are the key productivity hacks that you're using?
First of all, I would say there's no key productivity hack, right? Like there's only like a lot of things that somewhat correlate with more productivity, and for every person it's different. And that book is basically about just looking, first of all, at the cut set between like all of the productivity stuff out there and entrepreneurs specifically, and then saying like, what is a very specific thing that makes entrepreneurs more productive? And then it looks at a philosophically clean framework, kind of saying like, what needs to be there first, what needs to be there second, what needs to be third. First, there needs to be a very clear definition of goals, right? Like the framework the book follows is, if you don't know where you are, if you don't know where you want to go, like there's absolutely no way to do the best time management or energy management in the world. You might run super fast, but you might run super fast in the wrong direction, right? So that doesn't get you anywhere. So first of all, you need clarity. Without clarity, nothing happens, right? And like the first chapter of the book is really about that clarity. Then chapter 2 is, okay, I have clarity. How do I invest my time? Effectiveness and efficiency. Effectiveness is direction. You need to do the right things. Efficiency is speed. You do things with less resources. So with less amount of time, I can do the same result. Or like with less amount of energy, I can get to the same result. And there are, of course, myriad of hacks of like how to organize yourself to be more efficient, from like stacking your calls together to not have to do context switching, to like no call days to optimize for deep work, to like deadline management and like all sorts of things you can do there, to of course like all sorts of like micro goal setting strategies and so on. And then the third one is energy, because the moment you know what exactly to do tomorrow, you might not yet be able to just get up and do it, right? And that is the other tricky part. You don't just need to get up tomorrow and get yourself to get up out of bed at, you know, whatever time you want to start the day and then perform. You need to possibly do this for the next decade also, right? And that is not an easy problem to solve. There's a mental health problem in terms of resilience, right? Like, do I have the resilience to keep going for 10 years? And there's a daily energy problem in terms of like physical energy and physiology. Do I today feel the energy to do all of this? And for example, if you're inflamed, which is a physical phenomenon, we have less energy. And if you're less inflamed, we will just work harder because like we feel better, we have less pain, our body isn't attacking ourselves. So there's a lot of things we can do by just optimizing for physiology, by saying, okay, this is how my body works. I need to accept that I need X amount of sleep. The sleep needs to be high quality. My nutrition should be good. I should be insulin sensitive. I should have high mitochondrial efficiency. I should do some sort of like intermittent fasting, you know, like in order to optimize for chronoconsumption. All of these kind of things, they in the end lead to a better physiological state. And that better physiological state leads to higher performance. And that is the physical world. And then on top of the physical world, there's the mental world. That's what we talked about before, right? And in the mental world, it's very subjective. It's incredibly difficult to make to make clear statements. I mean, the world is still trying to define burnout, and in my opinion, it hasn't succeeded in doing so. Anything you look into in the burnout literature is contradictory. The first thing you find is defined as a workplace, disease, and then the studies that actually look at it, actually personal factors contribute more than work-related factors, and that's empirically true, but no one really knows why. And then defining the symptoms, it looks quite consistent, and then you look into the subfactors, and then it actually dissolves, right? And like no one can perfectly define, okay, like this is now burnout and this isn't yet, and I can still pull myself out of this or I can't, and it's extraordinarily hard. That doesn't mean that we can do something about it, right? I've clearly seen people that obviously and clearly burnt out, and you just see it, right? I've also seen people that probably thought they were burnout and they probably weren't. And there's still something they could do. And it was just a story they told themselves, right? And I think there's just a lot to be done to optimize one's own psychological state. It's just very hard to measure it. That doesn't mean we can be better than just doing nothing, right? And so the last part of the book is really like which strategies have empirically correlated with like higher levels of resilience, lower levels of stress, and so on and so forth. And that kind of concludes the book. And I never wrote this in order to publish it or anything. We got a publishing offer now for it. And I'm considering, but all I wanted to do is to just write something for the entrepreneurs I was working with. And I wanted them to have a framework. So the book was always written for like a very specific kind of entrepreneur who wants to do something extraordinarily difficult, which were the ones that I was working with. And it was basically just meant to be a guideline for like, hey, these are all of the things I know, 550 studies that I've read, like a couple of books, probably more than 100 or so, like condensed into like this thing. And if you do those things, you'll do well, right? And since then, it's picked up, it's been downloaded like 10,000 times, I think. And people are actually using it, which I never thought they actually would. It was just meant to be some sort of like mini summary.
Super cool. And I would like to pick up on that because, I mean, you're working yourself in a very fast-moving environment. You're very output-oriented, I would say. You work a lot of hours, right? And you probably also track your data, don't you? So I'm just
Depends
very
which
curious.
data.
Yeah. That's
Yes.
what I was asking for. Like, what are you tracking? What does the data show? I'm just very curious.
Yeah. So I track a lot of things, and I don't track them always, right? So let's maybe start with biomarkers, right? So twice a year, I track over 100 different biomarkers. I just want to check, like are my blood values like in line, like cortisol and so on. Cortisol tracking is incredibly hard. It really depends on like the time of the day you do it and so on. But if you do it really well, there is at least some sort of indication of, whether you have high stress or not. And, you can't function under chronic stress. Like my goal for this year is like 0 chronic stress. And I'm so far doing quite well with it. And this is number one. Of course, there's so much more inflammation and so on that we want to track. And I do this twice a year, once typically with a clinic in South Africa, where I have like a kind of concierge service and talk everything through with the doctor. And the other I typically do in Berlin with a lab and just look at the data. I do this still. However, the last times I tracked it, everything was like in the green values. So I basically feel, hey, I might not track this for the next 3 years or so, and basically just continue my routine because it seems to be working. When I started doing it, it wasn't, right? Like my vitamin B12, for example, was off. T3 was off, funnily, even though I thought I had gotten a lot of sun. So I didn't think I would have to supplement it, but it's at a way better level, right? So like it definitely was useful in the beginning, but it might not be more, which is a point I wanted to make anyway. There's a lot of things you need to track for a while to calibrate a sense. But after that while, you don't need it anymore because your body has this sense almost innately. I had this similar conversation with a friend of mine who said, well, like he's one of the craziest runners and one of the most fit people I've ever seen, broke a couple of records globally. And he basically said, well, I find it so stupid that people like use these trackers because I just feel, like when my lactate is off, or like when I, like when I'm too out of breath and need to like down my heart rate, and I can roughly count, like what is going on. And I asked him like, hey, did you use these trackers before? And he said, yeah, I used them all, but I don't think they're necessary, right? And I think they were necessary because the feeling he told me of, like feeling his lactate, like who can do this like generally, right? But he can because he's measured this and he developed a sense of calibration, and that allows him to not do the tracking right now and just listen to his body. It's almost like learning a new language. Like initially the 4 tones in Chinese, right? Like you E going up and E going down and E, and like those sound all the same. But the moment you've listened to it a couple of times, okay, those are the subtle differences. But you need exposure to it, you need measurement, you need some sort of teacher. And I think that's the same thing with measurement in general. But to complete the list holistically, the next thing I measure is like my sleep and my heart rate. I particularly place importance on heart rate variability, amount of deep sleep and REM sleep. Science believes now, I don't perfectly. So if you would ask me what's the probability you attach to the statement being correct, it would not be 100%. But the current belief of science is that REM sleep is for emotional recovery and deep sleep is for physical recovery. I find it likely to be true, but we can't say this with certainty given the current, stance of science. But therefore, I look at those. Of course, also look at my overall sleep time. I love that there's 2 effects going on with an Oura ring, right? The first effect is you have the data and you can do something about it. The second effect is you have the data and you actually have objectivity and you actually understand, oh shit, like I need to sleep more because your Oura ring gives you a low score, right? And that effect alone, irrespective of what the data specifically says, you're like, oh, I want to sleep now because I don't want to have this red score the next day, right? Like both of those effects help. So even if I wouldn't be looking at any of that data, just having the Oura ring to remind me that sleep is important to me and that I want to get to my 8 hours is incredibly important. And so that's the second thing I track. The third thing I track is my time. I have a spreadsheet in which I organize by half hour, like what am I spending my time on? Because at the end of the week, I like to look back at my week and understand, okay, did I move closer to my goals? And if I didn't, I ask myself, okay, what can I do next week in order to spend the majority of my time to move closer to my goals? Because that in the end, that has nothing to do with efficiency, but all with effectiveness, right? It just helps me to do the right things. It helps me to prioritize correctly. And I was always excited about the idea of doing very little and getting a lot, right? Like since my initial plan was to retire at my end 20s, and it sounded so crazy when I first formulated it. And then finally, it wasn't actually that hard and that difficult. And at that point, I just decided I wanted to do more. I wanted to push more, but it's a choice. And this is, by the way, also why I feel I never feel because I know I could stop work tomorrow. I would never have to work in my life. And I could basically just chill whenever I want to. And that makes it psychologically different to me to work a lot, because I always know I make this choice. And I make this choice again, like every week and every month. But I know if I want this all to end, it's my free choice to change this. It's my free choice to change my identity if I want to. I can be a different person tomorrow. Like no one says the Daniel you're meeting here today is the Daniel that needs to be around for the next 30 years. So if I want to change this, I change this, right? It's choice. And that makes it great. That makes it enjoyable.
That gives you freedom, right?
It feels like
it gives
freedom.
you a lot of freedom. Yeah.
Yes.
Actually, a lot of very wealthy and successful people say exactly the same as you were just saying. And it becomes a choice to work so much. It's just very different.
Exactly.
I actually would like to just take a step back on that question just briefly. And what's your strategy if you see when your numbers are off? I mean, that's when it becomes interesting, right?
Yes. And then you need to change. And change is the hardest part, right? And you always need to make enough time to reflect and build up the willpower for change. What I did in the beginning is I created a perfect framework. I kind of said, oh, this is what I need to do to be successful. And then I kind of defined how my week needs to look like. And it was just a fully packed week, right? Like, and right now I have a fully packed week, but this is kind of 10 years of stacking a little bit more productivity on top. Back then in the day, I, of course, wasn't able to stick to that level of productivity. So every week, my measurements were off, right? Every week, I didn't do as much as I wanted to do because I just had this massive plan of what was ideal and I didn't do it. And also every week, I felt so stressed that I was like, okay, next week I just got to try harder. And then I tried harder, nothing happened because I was just exhausted and was just too much, right? And I hadn't built the habits and routines to actually feel at ease with the system. So I just kept going. And like after 2 months, I was like, what the hell am I doing here, right? Like, why the hell am I not changing anything? And it's just getting worse and worse. And I think that's a really important point to make, because I think a great optimization system always allows for you to then make a real change, right? And the real change then after 2 months of trying this was I said, okay, I need to accept that I'm not as good as I think I am. And I need to accept that it will take time to get there. And either I keep lying to myself, which funnily I believe a lot of people do. I have a lot of conversations with especially young founders that lie to themselves in terms of how good and productive they are. And then when you call out the reality of what is happening, they feel attacked, right? And that's how I felt at that time, right? I felt attacked. I felt embarrassed at myself for just not being the person I wanted to be. And who I truly was versus who I wanted to be were not in alignment. And the story I told myself, and that's also what a lot of founders do, is like they tell themselves that this ideal of themselves, even though they aren't. And a lot of people are stuck there for the rest of their lives, and they never do something. And I call this, I call this process identity recalibration. So what I needed to do is to accept, first of all, okay, I'm here, I'm not there. In order to get there, I need to start thinking about how much more I can do, maybe in terms of incremental steps, maybe 5%, right? And suddenly you do the math. I originally started maybe with like, let's say 1 external call or so a week, and then like 1 call a day. And I was always nervous in front of my calls because I was mostly a technical person at that time. I wasn't used to calling people. It felt incredibly awkward, especially if I needed to sell stuff. So I essentially said, okay, 1 call is it, right? And after 2 weeks or so, it was kind of okay. And then I said, okay, maybe I'll do 1 more call per day. And then I did 2. And then I said, okay, if I add 1 call like every quarter, right? Like, and I initially just started with a call day. So I had all my calls in 1 day. I said I do 2 calls, and then I did 3 calls. And then after 1 year, maybe I did 5 calls. That was already something, right? And then after 2 years, I could do 10. And then after 3 years, I could do 15. And 15 calls a day is actually a lot. And like, that's where most people already stop, right? But like, if you incrementally just stack up volume, it actually works super well. And by now I easily do like 20, 25 calls, like sometimes 15-minute increments, just because I naturally stacked up, right? Like this didn't happen over like one day to the other, me having this motivational moment and being like, yeah, tomorrow I'm just gonna smack it and do a lot of sales or whatever. I basically just decided it's an incremental thing, right? And that's what I got from data. That's what I got from measurement. I measured that I wasn't like performing at the level and that I just need to incrementally. When it comes to physiology, it's very simple. Whenever I measure I am not fit, I take rest. Because I know if I get sick, it's going to take me even more time, right? And it's so easy to say, oh, I just do 2-3 more hours today. I don't. Like if my Aura ring shows me heart rate variability is down, body temperature is up, heart rate is up, then I take rest. And there's a supplement stack, right, that can help. But the most important thing is you actually just lie down, you rest, you cancel calls, and you get sick way less often. I haven't like been sick a lot in the last 10 years. And I think primarily that is because of how I respond to data of like what I'm tracking on a daily basis. And by the way, this again is informed by my time tracking. I would have not have realized how much productivity I lose when I'm sick if I hadn't tracked it.
Interestingly enough, we have talked to a couple of people already here at Speakspan who also measured a lot, they tracked a lot, and they did quote unquote everything right, basically. So they did the supplements, the nutrition, the workout, you name it. And still at some point they burned out, and for them it didn't even really show in the data. But what I'm actually would like to point at right now is what they said is that it actually can become all the tracking a little bit pathological, and it can create even more stress. And yeah, you're nodding. So that's very interesting. I would love to understand, what have you observed in your own life around this balance?
Yes, I think you always need to ask yourself, why am I doing all of this? Right. And if the tracking becomes part of the optimization system that you don't even understand why you're doing it for, or comes from external pressure, I think it gets really, really dire, right? I always think about it in terms of like, am I still playing the game or am I trapped? Is it pathological, as you say, right? And I always measure things also when I played games, right? Like you play something and you're enjoying it, and then you want to understand, okay, how does this game work, right? Like how do the points, whatever system, whatever currency the game works with, like what is the science behind of this, right? And how does understanding the science and tracking the data actually help me win the game? And as long as it's still that, I feel personally fine about it, right? Because like I'm tracking all of this in order to increase my output in the game I'm playing, which is generally enjoyable. If I'm feeling like I'm just tracking for the sake of tracking and I'm optimizing a system that is killing me, then I need to stop, right? This is also like my first reaction to time management was, it was just really hard, like sitting down every day, and I hadn't yet built the discipline to go through like a daily checklist and just reserve the time at the end of every day to just like do my admin work, right? And I needed to stop it. And I think if you have the discipline to be always ready to stop, that's freedom again, right? Like I'm free to abandon anything I do any day, right? I don't have to do this tracking. I don't have to be good at those metrics. It doesn't matter, right? Like, why the hell does it matter? Because I care about the game. And that's all that, like that is part of it. And I've always had this attitude towards my optimization. I always said, okay, I'm doing this because I love doing this. And therefore I personally felt never being close to like just completely nuking myself. Who knows, right? Like I'm 30 now, like I might, when things get more difficult. I also noticed, by the way, I don't have the energy anymore I had at 20. I have still extraordinarily high levels, but sleeping for like 3 hours, like 5 days in a row, not a good idea. So I don't do it anymore, right? I don't fool myself. So I think accepting the natural process of aging and accepting that like the environment changes and the circumstances change, and being open to just abandoning everything you do, like, definitely helps with this. And then, of course, being in control of the variables that define the pressure, because sometimes you are not as a founder, right? Sometimes as a funding round, you're running out of capital. And then I think you really, it's not about measuring or doing anything. It's just about what is the story you tell yourself about this race. And if you attach yourself to that company, your identity to that company, then I think you burn out, because like your identity is dying with, the extinction of your runway. And that I think is a horrible phenomenon. So I invest a lot of time in also detaching myself from all of this and saying like, hey, I'm so much more than my company. I'm so much more than my optimization system. And even though the tracking is fun, I'm more than that, right? Like I'm like, if I wouldn't be doing any of that, like I would still be Daniel, and like who Daniel is someone else entirely. And as long as you accept this, I personally think there is very low risk of burnout. I think the burnout comes from you attaching yourself to it, becoming your company, becoming the system, and that leads to the pain, and that leads to the stress.
Like everything you've shared so far, I feel like is really all about your attitude towards things and skill to honestly self-reflect and then have self-honesty about where you are. So, wow. I would love to now touch on the topic we've been covering a bit already, burnout. So I guess you're talking to 100, maybe thousands of founders each year. And I'd be curious, like, do you have a pattern now? Can you see patterns of people that are more prone to go into a burnout?
For sure, I do. There's a lot of stuff going on there. I think the first one I've already explained, right? Like people who like fully attach their identity to like what they're doing, which is partially a good thing because it makes you care a lot, right? And partially a bad. And we don't have the time today to unpack that, because like that's the whole thing. Like, how do you care enough about what you're building and at the same time detach, right? Like it's a key challenge in any way. A lot of entrepreneurs do this too much, and that leads to burnout, in my opinion. The second thing is that, first of all, I strongly believe there's a genetic component. There's a lot of studies suggesting this. It's not clear, but I think it's fair to assume that there's a genetic component. And some people are just not as resilient as others. Like I personally find this perfectly intuitive. Like everyone is born different. Everyone is born to do different stuff. And not everyone is born to be an entrepreneur. Entrepreneur is high stress and high pace, and playing basketball is something else entirely. And for playing basketball, you need to be tall if you want to become the world's best. And if someone is born and is 1 meter 40 centimeters in height, they don't have great prospects of being the world's best basketball player. And everyone understands this, and everyone accepts it. And for resilience, it's much more hidden. You can't physically see it, but it's just as true. It's just as much there, right? So I think like we need to accept that not everyone is meant to do this path of career, like at least to the level a billion outcome, or like what the kind of venture capitalist community wants to see, right? Like being a lifestyle entrepreneur, making your own money, like that's something else entirely. But like super high performance, high stress, high pace, hyper growth kind of work, not everyone is built to do this, and this is okay. Like that person who's 1 meter 40, like they might not be the world's best basketball player, but they might have like an incredibly high IQ and like maybe marry the, like the Newtonian physics with the quantum physics, right? And finally, find a unified theory. And that is a way bigger contribution to society than throwing a ball into a basket, right? So that's also okay. So that's the second component. The third pattern I'm seeing is people overpromise. A lot of people who have like very high standards, they make a lot of promises because they think they can do a lot. They're very optimistic. A lot of great entrepreneurial success comes from optimism, from believing that things are possible that most people don't believe are possible. That often translates to people thinking they can do more than they actually can, and they get excited and they make promises in calls, and then they can't deliver on those promises, and they burn out, right? So learning to say no, learning to not overpromise, learning to be optimistic and at the same time realistic, in my opinion, is incredibly important. And if you don't acquire this skill, you will be suffering. Concrete example, I've been asked by probably 40 people or so, like in the past 2 quarters, to do a podcast, right? And I told them I don't do podcasts anymore, and which I generally don't, right? Like, you're a really good friend, Sophie. I wanted to do this podcast, but I know the moment it's gonna go live, people are gonna be so angry, right? And like, they're gonna be texting me and be like, Daniel, you told me you don't do podcasts anymore, right? And like, and now you're doing a podcast, right? And same thing with investing, right? Like, we have 60,000 applicants a year. We take 30. It's, like, a lot of people get declined, and we kind of need to say, no, that makes us good at what we're doing. But these people are angry. And I think one of the things an entrepreneur, like, the more you do, like, the more you will have to say no, right? Like, needs to come to terms with is that people will just be angry at you. And it will always be like this. And some of those people, get so angry that they start doing crazy shit that can be really, really hurtful. And as long as you don't let this to get to yourself, and you have maybe a group, of other people that can relate, that can tell you, like, that is how I feel, right? Like, and this thing happened to me. It already helps, right? So this art of saying no, this art of learning to accept that you can never make everyone happy, and that people will be angry and they will hate you, and that's okay, is very important. If you can't live with this, if you have this innate sense of harmony, and a lot of people do, right? Like, they always want everyone to be happy. Burnout risk, in my opinion. I could go on, but like, I've talked a lot about this one.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe something that I'm sure you've come across is wearing different hats in Daniel Dippold's life. And how did you historically deal with the situation where you, from a human perspective, saw that maybe a founder was in a high functioning burnout, was maybe almost hitting a wall, was really, the health was deteriorating, but from an investor perspective, most likely your incentive would be for that person to continue, right? So how do you deal with these situations?
Yeah, I think it's a very clear answer, right? Like, it's again short-term thinking. It's like, oh, like, I think it's perfectly aligned, by the way. I don't think that discrepancy exists. And I hear it from a lot of people, right? But the truth is, it's a little bit like your Aura ring saying you're close to dying, and then you push through and you get sick, right? And it's like, oh, fuck, I didn't expect to get. This is like an investor telling, like, oh, you need to pull through. No, like, if you are already burning out, then there's no way. And maybe that person's going to push a week more or a month more, but they're not going to make it. Like, they're in burnout, right? Like, it's just not going to happen. So what you actually need to do is to accept reality. I think a lot of investors have problems with accepting reality. The reality is this person is at the brink of suffering a lot. In my opinion, it's your responsibility to do something that helps this person. It's your responsibility to step in and force that person to stop, because they might not have realized it themselves, and they might still push and be like, oh shit, I'm not good enough, I need to, like, oh yeah, I'm suffering, but like, I need to prove to the world. I think it's your responsibility to say, hey, I have a helicopter view, I can look at this with a little bit more chill, and what is going on here is not good, and you need a break, and we organize a break. I've also seen investors using this to throw founders out and do bad levers and whatnot. And this is, again, a philosophy I don't agree with, because then if you get rid of that person's shares and then you get a new CEO that has fresh energy, right? Like, I've just had a conversation with someone who very proudly told me this, like, yeah, this founder burnout, so I got like 30% back, and I had a fresh CEO, and now he has 4 years until burnout. And I almost screamed at this person, like I was so angry, because I was like, what the, like, are you doing here to, to what's going on? I think the right way to resolve a situation like this is tell the founder, well, do a 3-month, half year, whatever sabbatical. Like I will step in, like to try work out how to continue with the company. I will find someone either internally who steps up or externally. And when you feel recharged, let's establish a new protocol that helps you operate sustainably or leave the company. If you personally decide this is not for you and you want to leave the company, I need equity back, because I want to make this company succeed, which is also in your interest, and we cannot ruin the cap table. So we need to find a solution to work this out. If you decide to go full throttle again and you can do this and you feel excited about this journey, then we will go full throttle, no changes. But whatever we do, we will find the best solution for you to move forward, and it will be in your interest, right? I just haven't seen any VC in like 2020 beyond that can create long-term value by not having a founder's back.
Okay, I would like to switch gears a little bit to the end and just ask you maybe a little bit more of a personal question, because I'm curious, have you done some kind of immersive personal inner work, like a retreat or somatic work or something, that you worked on something more of your internal world, basically? I would be curious.
I do this all the time, right? Like I meditate since I'm 5 years old. I've been to ashrams multiple times. I did deep dive retreats, somatic retreats, where you released anger and tension through movement, right? And so, somatic dynamic meditation. So these are like multiple, like there's so many things. And I work with a coach right now who is very skilled in somatic, but also all sorts of psychoanalysis and like so many different areas, right? And like one of the things I think we talked about this in the very beginning before the recording started, feelings, right? And learning to feel your feelings through to completion is an extraordinarily important skill, in my opinion. It's very easy as an entrepreneur, especially me as a mathematician, to hyper rationalize and say, oh, these are the facts, right? But the truth is, we're emotional human beings, and we need to accept our emotions. And when they come, they affect our body, right? And not feeling them, suppressing them is a big problem. So just learning to feel your emotions to like the very completion is incredibly important, right? So like he's very skilled at this and he helps me with this. And like whenever sometimes we talk about stuff and like sometimes I feel fear, right? And what he always says is, well, let's welcome the fear. Let's accept it for what it is. Let's understand why this fear is so important and what it helps us to do. And suddenly, many of these stressors go away. So I do this almost every week, every second week. And then I'm working with a crazy Russian psychologist who is skilled in Jungian psychoanalysis and so much more, right? Who like, and partly even looking at like old ancient, like Eastern texts and helping me in that dimension, right? And that is a relationship I'm just planning to most likely establish at this point. But I think it's extraordinarily important to have a strong connection to your body. I think if you don't, it's just a question of time until it kills yourself. I think definitely the entrepreneurial stress was related to Steve Jobs' cancer. You can never say this with certainty, but that's the story I tell myself. And if you don't learn to process all of these things happening to you, it's a problem, right? So I invest a lot of my time into these kind of things. I of course track my time and then see, am I overdoing it or is it still serving me? But at this point, I do believe I'm very happy that I'm investing this time.
We are at time, but I would love to ask you the closing question, a closing tradition we have, maybe in just one sentence. Dani, how do you feel when you're at your peak?
I feel exhilarated. I love the feeling of flow, the feeling of forgetting about time and just being in pure joy, being in the moment. And I believe life, in essence, only happens in the moment. And that's how I feel when I'm at my peak.
Thank you so much, Danny, for the conversation. It was amazing to have you. For everyone who liked the conversation, please leave us a comment, share it with someone that you know. And if you follow us, that goes a long way for us. So thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.